Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. Today's guest is Josh Cohen. Josh has 20 years of experience practicing and teaching meditation and has conducted numerous workshops and seminars in Toronto and in various locations abroad. He explains the meditative process through the concepts of physics, philosophy, and psychology, illustrating the principles involved from all three viewpoints in an effort to give students a broad spectrum for reference for their practice. Josh specializes in teaching beginners the principles of establishing a meditation practice, and he deeply cherishes the opportunity to share from his own direct experience how these techniques have better equipped him in balancing the challenges of life. Josh leads the mindfulness components of several yoga teacher training programs and presents meditation annually for the Association of Law Officers of the Crown while practicing family, civil litigation, and estate law in Hamilton, Ontario. Josh, real pleasure having you on the show today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I was talking to my wife, who is a well-seasoned yogi, and we decided that if we were going to do a series on yoga, a practice that can inform and transform one's life, we definitely had to take a fairly deep dive into some of the primary tenets of that practice, being meditation and mindfulness. And so she definitely recommended that I reach out and touch base with you so that we can pick your brain on all of these insights.
I'm glad she did.
Now, I think both you and I are dealing with a little bit of a cold, so this should be a fun interview. So at any time, if people hear us blow our nose or something, it's all good. Now, Josh, how did you end up moving did you get into meditation and mindfulness and yoga prior to being a lawyer, or more as a therapy to manage being a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure grateful that I have it as a lawyer because it certainly helps, especially when you're dealing with matrimonial law or any kind of litigation. But actually what happened was, it was the summer before I was writing the bar exams. So I had already completed law school, and I was visiting a friend out in Main Island, BC, one of the Gulf Islands. And she had a yoga video from Patricia Walden, so this is going way back. And I tried it while I was visiting, and although it was all foreign to me, I kind of liked how I felt afterwards, and I did it the next day. And before I knew it, when I came back and was studying for the bar, I took out more videos and was practicing at home. And so that was my introduction to yoga. It started to take hold, and it helped me through the bar exams. I noticed immediately that if I didn't quite know the answer to a question right away, I had an immediate recognition or realization that I was tensing my body. And so by relaxing that tension, it helped me to reorient my focus back on the question and think it through. So afterwards, I decided that I didn't want to go to law right away and be a lawyer. I wanted to take a little more time off. At this time, I had gone to a library and started taking out books on Buddhism because I didn't know anything about it. It was in vogue, along with yoga at the time. And a book I took out really had a meaningful impact on me. It was the first time I had really read something that felt so meaningful that it really evoked sensations and feelings in me. So I continued to learn more about it, and I ended up going to India for 6 months in early 2002. At which point, after traveling around for 4 or 5 months, I did a 10-day silent retreat. And it was at this 10-day silent retreat, a Vipassana retreat, that I instilled the meditation practice. And understood it a little more. And also just by participating in it, I was able to really gain some insights into myself and my past. And when I came back from all of that, I decided, you know what, I could go back to law, or I could further my studies. And I enrolled in a yoga teacher training program and completed that over the following year. And one thing led to the next, and I ended up teaching yoga for 10 years in Toronto, more or less on a full-time basis, with an emphasis more on the meditative and the restorative side of things.
Nice. What book was it offhand that was so transformative for you?
Yeah, it was by someone named Osho, who has a little infamy now due to the Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country. But what he was doing, and his gift really, was that he was very articulate at being able to take ancient texts and provide a very contemporary commentary on it. And it was the Book of Wisdom. And what it was the mind training techniques of a Buddhist monk named Atisha. And so he went through these different mind training techniques, which ended up being basically the components of meditation. And yeah, it really woke me up.
Mm-hmm. I love it when you get those types of experiences because they really do kind of wake you up a little bit. And it probably would have been a very big difference from, especially when you're studying when you're studying for the bar exam, and which is very intellectually based. I mean, you're trying to remember lots of stuff. It's very head heavy. And then all of a sudden you have a knowingness, or which is almost like a full body kind of an experience, very different from the heady experience. So I imagine that probably really stood out to you because it probably was quite a different feeling than what you maybe had in the past.
Yeah, it was unmistakable, and it was coming from the heart center. It was this sense of intuition and knowing that this is important, this is meaningful. The rest of the stuff that I've learned, it's practical, it has its purpose here and there, but this is the essence of life, and it really captured my interest.
Mm-hmm. How did that transition, moving from a bit more of a mind intellectual focus from law to moving more towards a body sensory practice, how did that impact you? What kind of benefits have you seen with it?
Oh, well, there's a tremendous amount of benefits. When I was young, and when I say young, like all the way through university, really, my undergraduate degree, I was very self-conscious. So I was always in my head. I was always analyzing, thinking, to the point of inaction. Like I just couldn't just make a decision because I was so analytical and thinking about all the things that could go right or wrong. I guess that would be akin to being like a perfectionist in a lot of ways. So what's interesting in the Eastern philosophy is that they say that any extreme will create its opposite. So if you become too far yang, for example, you start to become yin. And you can see that in the yin-yang symbol, that as you go to the extreme part of the black, there's actually a white dot in the middle, and vice versa. So what I felt like I was a little too left-brained, analytical, etc., and that by finding a practice like yoga that brought me into my body, and also the Eastern philosophy in general, which really spoke without any it spoke clearly and directly without the need to shroud it in stories and metaphors the way that a lot of other religions tend to do. And so that spoke to me, that sort of scientific approach to the mind and the body and so forth. So as I started to focus attention more about my body, stretching it, feeling it, moving it, etc., then I found that I stopped becoming so paralyzed by analysis and overthinking, and was better able to take action and better able to interact with others, and just became more present in my life.
Well, that's such a big one because I think we live in a extremely self-conscious world right at the moment. So I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I mean, we have enough on our own, and then to sort of be worried about how we think the world's perceiving us as well. But so how did that exactly work then? Just stepping into being more mindful, how does that start to mute some of the self-consciousness that was going on? What's that process?
Okay. Well, I mean, that process comes from several angles. So certainly yoga asana, so, taking the postures, moving your body and moving it in dynamic ways that we don't always move it in, helps you to become more connected to your body. So you feel your body more. You're not able to really wander so far along a tangent that you lose that connection to the here and the now and the body. And yoga, of course, uses the breath as the agent to connect the mind with the body in the same way that meditation does to connect the mind with the present moment. Both of those in concert, although at the beginning I was mostly yoga. I wasn't really meditating until about 6 months after I started doing yoga. And that actually was interesting how it happened. Is like I was waiting for a friend to pick me up for a social event, but I had been outside in the sun all day at a triathlon, and I had sunstroke, and I had the worst headache imaginable. And but I had to be on. I had to be present for the social event, and I didn't know what to do. So in a moment of crisis, and I've often heard it said that it's crisis or vanity that leads one to realization, that I was able to let go of fighting the pain in my head. I was able to detach in a sense and become sort of the witness or the observer of it. And as soon as I did that, the sensation, the pain was still there, but there was no more suffering anymore. And I was able to actually go on and have quite a good night. So that was one sort of catalyst to detach myself from identification with the body and the mind, and to recognize that there's a part of our awareness that can witness things without actually identifying to them.
Nice.
What were some other things? Yeah. I'm trying to think what was some of the other things that had happened. So the question again that you started with was?
Just curious about the process with self-consciousness, just because I do find that something that I think almost everybody is struggling with in a lot of ways. So, and just because of that history of you being self-conscious and finding the meditation practice helped to quiet that, either maybe it was that internal voice or that internal critic a little bit, or?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, what meditation and yoga does, and running or any kind of skillful task that we take on, is it forces you to focus in the present on whatever you're doing. And so with yoga and meditation, is really we're focusing on our breath. We're also focusing on sensations as they come and go as we go a little deeper in our practice. But in the beginning, it's on the breath. And the breath is what's in the present moment. It's what's arising and subsiding. And we can see both the voluntary quality and the involuntary quality of it too, which is nice. So the more that I started to focus on the breath, pay attention to it, the less I was prone to wander, to go into daydreaming, or self-consciousness, fears, desires, like all of those storylines didn't have my attention anymore, because my attention was increasingly being reoriented back to the here and the now, on the breath. And by doing that, it took me out of my self-consciousness, and it took me into just what's arising here now, whether it's listening to somebody else who's speaking with me without me like wandering off, or focusing on my work at hand, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's such a powerful practice that way, because at the same point, even that practice of pulling yourself back to that present moment, it stops you from doing whatever else the habituation would have been. So even in the practice of just not doing that habitual thing, we start to basically break down those pathways so it doesn't become so familiar anymore while you're building a new default, sort of. So
Yeah.
I think it's such a powerful way to change patterns that we might once have been caught up in, and to really build new neural networks for new patterns and new behaviors that are more favorable for us.
Yeah, and fresh. We come out of our habitual patterns, right? Because we're creatures of habit, and it's very easy for us to become grooved in certain ways of acting and being and thinking. And so when we stop feeding those, like you were saying, the wiring in the brain starts to shift. And there's this concept called neuroplasticity, where you can actually change the way that neurons fire and are wired together into a new pattern. And meditation is, I like to think of it as like a reset or an eraser, and it kind of brings you back into that primordial being, or that fresh slate that we have, where we're very much a beginner's mind and able to see things as if we're seeing them for the first time.
Mm-hmm. What do you feel is the primary purpose of meditation? What would be the reason why we should incorporate meditation?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's lots of reasons, but the primary purpose of meditation is to have you experience who you really are, what you really are. Is to dispel the illusions of what we become identified with, which is form. So we tend to think of ourselves as, I'm a 40-something-year-old male, and I have this body, and I have this past, and so forth, which is true to an extent, and practical to an extent. But ultimately, we're going to be faced with having to let go of this form. And in fact, things like Shavasana and yoga is practice of, letting go of the body and experiencing our pure consciousness and awareness. So meditation is a technique, a technology to help us experience consciousness and awareness, free of form, and to recognize our non-dual nature, that we are, although on the surface it appears that we're separate and different, at our essence we're actually the same thing. We're made of the same building blocks of nature, and we're all connected. Gravity is proof of this. And so to have at an experiential level the sense of connection with everything, and the realization that we're the whole. And so that's, I think, what is the ultimate purpose of meditation. Some of the benefits to meditation are, well, it makes you more efficient. By focusing in the present moment, you're less likely to become distracted. You find that you can do your work more efficiently, more skillfully. Conversely, you require less sleep, so you don't have to process as much. There's as much of a personality going through stories in your dreams. When you sleep, you actually let go, and you get nice, deep, restful sleep. It also is a self-regulatory process. So if anything is out of balance, meditation, like its root, mediation, is like bringing to center and balancing. So, if you find, like, a lot of times I'll sit down to meditate and realize, I'm holding tension on one side of my body more than the other. Maybe it's my right shoulder, maybe it's my left, or my right or left quad, etc. So there's that, okay, so I've been wired that way recently to fire this tension, and now I can observe it and let it go and reset. It's the same with the emotions and thoughts. They'll come to the surface, they'll rise, but then they will pass on, and afterwards you realize, okay, well, this is my base again, my home base, as being the observer, the witness of it all. And as I think we'll get to, there's been studies about how meditation actually does change your brain physically. It creates more matter in certain areas. And so, yeah, there's a whole host of amazing benefits to it. I think there's a reason why it's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and is really found in every religion. At the core of every religion, there's some type of contemplative technique, some type of self-observation. And if you look at the founders of the religions, they all isolated themselves. Moses went up the mountain, Muhammad went into the desert, Jesus as well, and they had this type of insightful revelation, and they came back, and people around them recognized that they were different, that they had changed in some way, and there was something that they wanted to learn from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is the time that we are in right now, is where a lot of old traditional methods of healing, of living our lives in certain ways, is now being recognized even more clearly, and being validated in certain ways that the brain likes to validate by. So science is explaining, yoga and meditation and mindfulness have got so many benefits to them that are coming up every day. You could read a new article on the benefits. My wife and I were just at a course with Bessel van der Kolk on trauma therapy, and he's one of the cutting edge psychiatrists in trauma therapy, and it's all coming back to mindfulness. He talks about as being the absolute first step in order to being able to work with trauma, because if it's not there, there's nothing to work with. And they're using yoga, and they're using meditation and movement and all of these types of traditional, actually a lot of things that are really inherent in almost all cultures. It's almost like all cultures had these capacities within all of these things to heal themselves and their lives in a lot of ways. And they kind of got broken apart over the years, at least in Western cultures. So it seems like a lot of it's coming back to revalidate and now bring that stuff back to the forefront again. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time over these next decades. Now, who would be your primary teacher now? I was reading something that was interesting, the way you talked about the importance of kind of where I think you used to gain information from your teachers and now what your primary teacher is. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
For sure. Yeah, you're a little lagging on my end, so I hope that it's just on my end. Yeah, I studied so many teachers through I took about 10 years to immerse myself. And I've had wonderful teachers along the way. Ron Reed comes to mind in Toronto. Diane Bruni was a mentor as well. As well with all of the historical teachers, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, Maimonides, there's so many. But I came to a point where I realized that the work was now about developing my connection with nature. That nature is the true teacher. It's the field that we're in that, in a sense, creates the rules. And so to understand nature's qualities is vital in order for us to understand who we are, because we're inseparable from nature. And so there came a time, it was around when I was 28 or 29, when I started to recognize that I could really feel energetic shifts, qualities, so forth. I could tell when things were sort of on an expansion or contracting, getting heavier, denser, etc. And then I started to pay attention. I started, I think one of my default nature is to be scientific, a real observer of things, really interested in pattern recognition. And so I started to observe patterns in nature and to correlate it with how I was feeling and what I was observing in people around me, and started to recognize how nature has three primary cycles. There's the solar cycle of going around the Earth, going around the sun once every 365 days, so our year. There's the lunar cycle, where the moon goes around the Earth every 29 days. And then there's the diurnal cycle, which the Earth's spinning on its axis once every 24 hours. So I started to see that there were patterns and connections between these cycles and the qualities within them, and how they influenced how I felt and how others felt, and how nature around me was acting. Along with those big cycles, there's also things that sort of fluctuate more readily day to day, things like temperature, light, humidity, barometric pressure, these types of things. And so I just started to pay attention to all of this, and I recognized that there are times that are conducive to growing, and other times which are more conducive to resting, consolidating, and how everything is basically pulsating or vibrating in nature. Every atom pulsates and vibrates, and nature in general has times during its cycles where it's expanding and other times when it's contracting. And so I recognized that this was a vital object of my meditation practice, and that the more that I could observe these natural cycles and the quality of nature in the present moment, the more I would understand how I was feeling. So it's such that, for example, if I started to feel like a headache was starting, chances are that there was like a weather shift. There's some kind of barometric pressure, low pressure was coming in, and maybe coming in 6 hours, maybe the next day, but it was coming. And then that took away the suffering. So where before I'd be like, oh, I've got this headache, oh, woe is me, you know, when will this end, and so forth, and getting a little tense around it, I realized, oh, well, this actually, it's an external cause, you know, it's part and parcel of the greater nature. And so I don't need to resist it. I'll just embrace it with the wisdom that it's caused by something that I'm part of.
Nice. I think that's a really important point too. And again, that's something that is often incorporated in things like Chinese medicine, for example. So I think of it even like seasonally with how we eat.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like if we really paid attention to, without getting caught up in just the routine of how we do things. So for example, if somebody is having their fruit smoothie with ice every morning and their salads every day, and they don't really think twice about it, but if they kind of tune in to when we start to move to colder fall weather and we're moving into the really cold weather in winter, if our body's reacting openly to some of those things, or if it's getting these cravings towards different types of things that are maybe more like soups or stews or something that might more be in balance with what the environment around us is showing us.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. You know, it's interesting. I noticed how in the heat of summer, like July, we get sort of the leafy greens and the soft berries. And then as we pass the solstice, we get into August, we start to get into peaches. And then we get nectarines. And then we get pears. And then we get apples. And then eventually, as we get into winter, we get squashes. And so what's happening is as the light is receding, the food is getting denser.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it's like nature's giving you what it wants you to eat, what will balance you, what will balance your health in the particular conditions that are present. So yeah, I fully agree. Like eating seasonally, eating locally, which I think is basically the same thing, is very vital in our practice. And like related to that is to recognize how stimulants and depressants, you know, throw us off. It's very hard to expect you to have peace and equanimity and balance if you are constantly stimulating yourself. You know, like for example, coffee, the coca plant, and it grows in very hot climates. And so when you're down in Costa Rica or Mexico, whatever, where this grows, the sun, he's very oppressive. So you need something to balance that. And this is a nice pick-me-up for that. But if you are, you know, like you were saying, just mindlessly taking coffee every morning and it's January and it's very yin here and there's not a lot of energy, it's very easy to get unbalanced that way and overstimulated. And people wonder why, you know, they have trouble sleeping or, you know, they're very anxious and nervous and so forth. Alcohol sort of on the opposite side of things. It's a central nervous depressant. So, you know, it may make you feel relaxed and okay while you're feeling the effects, but when it wears off, it's usually the nervous system springs back the opposite way and becomes like over anxious and so forth. And it's again, getting back to like what I said earlier on, how extremes create their opposites. Mm. And so I think really the goal of meditation is to mediate, is to try to find what is that middle ground where we're not getting too pulled one way from center or the other way from center, and that we can try to keep more of a holistic balance.
Nice. And it sounds like your practice with using nature as your teacher really brought you back in some ways to being really in tune with your body's sensations, almost like listening to your body more clearly again. Reminds me of, what was his name? Fritz Perl, the founder of Gestalt psychology, and he said, lose your mind and come to your senses. So it's this idea of getting out of the head and paying more attention to the body and just what our sensorial experience is. And nature is such a profound way to interact with that. Mm-hmm. Josh, what is the difference between meditation and mindfulness? Or is there?
Right. Well, mindfulness is a subset of meditation. So we could say that mindfulness is under the greater umbrella of meditation. And mindfulness, I believe, is a term that was coined or initiated by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who brought it over in in the late 1970s, and he started a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which has been very well received, and it's taught, I think, in hospitals everywhere and in other places as well. Mindfulness, the way John Kabat-Zinn brought it over, is basically the Western translation or interpretation of vipassana. Vipassana is a Pali word that translates as insight, and Pali was the language spoken by the historical Buddha, and it is said that this was the technique that the Buddha taught, this mindfulness of the breath, and then moving to mindfulness of the body's sensations and experiencing their transience. But there are other types of meditation that are more mantra-based. So a mantra is like a syllable or a string of syllables that you repeat over and over again. And by doing so, it helps to really focus your mind in the here and the now. It's very effective for concentration. But I found that while it's very effective for concentration, it wasn't as well-rounded and effective for understanding the impermanence of sensations, the impermanence of phenomenon, the way that vipassana and mindfulness are. So that's the main reason why I was drawn to vipassana and mindfulness, because it's something where you are truly the observer. You're really trying to let go and just watch what's happening without influencing it. Whereas with transcendental meditation and mantra-based meditations, you were having to like create the mantra. You were having to manifest it in your mind and say it. And it kind of kept me locked in the mind a little too much, in the cerebral aspect of my being. Mindfulness is a type of meditation. There are other types of ways to meditate. Some people do really well with mantra-based. Deepak Chopra is a huge proponent of it. He's done obviously quite well with it, and many others. So I wouldn't suggest to anybody to not try it, but certainly explore a couple different types of techniques to find out which is best suited for them.
For beginners just trying to start out and get a foothold for it, what would be some good beginning practices for someone, whether with meditation or with mindfulness, that they could start right away that's not too intense for them to begin with?
Yeah, okay, great question. I mean, really, anytime that you pause in your day to simply observe what's happening with you, what's the quality of your breath? How do I feel right now internally? What's happening even around me, like in my immediate environment? All of this is very effective mindfulness and meditation practice. And one of the biggest misconceptions beginners have is that they shouldn't think, or that they sit down and try to practice, that thoughts shouldn't arise. And if thoughts keep arising, you keep getting distracted, that for some reason you're not doing it properly. Well, actually, the very first insight of any meditation practice is that your mind is very busy, and you really don't have much control over it. And I think in Eastern philosophy, they call it the monkey mind, because, I can't sit still for a second. It's always doing something. And so the first thing is to have the understanding that in the beginning, you're going to be thinking a lot, and you should not expect to have these moments of emptiness and bliss and zen that maybe you've read about or heard about or are striving for, but instead to slowly work your way up to being able to sit for a longer period of time. And so even if it's just 2 minutes, that's a start. And sit for 2 minutes and just try to observe the breath as it comes in and as it goes out. And then maybe you'll try 5 minutes. And the idea is to slowly start to ramp it up. Ideally, you'll get to 20 or 30 minutes as a sort of typical or average time for a meditation practice. And the reason for that is because I found, and people have told me as well, that sometimes the first 10 or 15 minutes when we sit down to meditate, the mind is just going everywhere. This is arising, that's arising, this uncomfortable sensation arises in the body, my back is sore, my neck, whatever it is, these types of distractions arise. But after the 15 or 20 minute mark, the mind loses its force. It runs out of gas and it just drops. And you might just have a moment, but that moment is so important because it's the experience of recognizing, this is what it feels like to just be free and fresh in the present moment, and not be so addicted or slave to this compulsive type of thinking all the time, always thinking about something and not being able to turn off that thinking quality of our mind. So what I suggest is using a timer, because if you have a timer, then that's going to be something that you'll strive to achieve. And in the beginning, that will be helpful for you to work through those moments when you want to rationalize why you need to like get up and go check the fridge or your email or whatever it might be. And it'll help you to build up to a longer period of time, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Some people who have a hard difficulty with it could try shifting from the observation of your thoughts to observation of sounds. So the shift from thinking to listening can be really helpful for people. So sometimes I'll suggest that, just sit and listen and wait for those sounds to come in from both inside and outside of the room. And that's that sort of receptive quality that we're trying to cultivate, instead of that transmission that we are typically in, we're always thinking and like transmitting outwards. We're now like becoming more receptive and letting nature come to us and the moment come to us. And also, there are guided techniques, guided lessons online. There are apps that are available. Certainly these can be helpful. The only caveat I have with that is to not completely rely on external guided meditation. We definitely want to move towards being able to meditate without any kind of external prompt or guidance. So mix it up. So maybe you'll do a guided meditation for a couple of days, but then you'll do a couple of days without it. Same with like music. People like to use music to help them slow down and center their mind. Again, really helpful. I love it. I think music was my first way of meditating before I knew what meditation was. I used to go to concerts all the time, and that really brought me into the moment, especially the music combined with the movement, the dancing, was very much a meditative technique. So beginners are definitely going to, first of all, there's just the unknown, right? It's like not knowing what to expect and having these, like I said, misconceptions that when you sit down to meditate, you should be able to just do it. Of course not. It's like we are learning how to master our mind, and it's no different than sitting down in front of a grand piano and realizing like, I got to first learn some scales before I have any hope of being able to play a song, right? And so when we sit down and meditate, we need to have the patience and the self-compassion that it's going to be a little challenging at first, but as long as we are consistent with it, even 2 minutes a day will start to draw us to want to do it more, because there's such a gravity to taking a time out and just pausing, and not feeling like you need to be doing anything. It's something that's so restorative in nature that it's unmistakable. And once you start, it's just a matter of time before you start looking forward to your 20 minutes on your cushion, or in your chair or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. It's so very true. And I know for my wife and I, it's one of our favorite times at night now, once the kids fall asleep and we've got a bit of time where we can sit. And depending on how much has been going on for the day, I completely can attest to 10 or 15 minutes sometimes it takes before you naturally just start to slow things down enough where then you can sort of drop into this different, slower state where you're not in that thinking mind so much. But yeah, there are definitely times where you have to sit for a little bit before that naturally fades away.
Mm-hmm.
For the people that are uncomfortable, because a lot of times what'll come up when I'm talking to people about meditation, they might feel like they can't sit. It's too painful in their body, or it's even too scary as far as what they're afraid is going to surface when they do decide to sit. Any suggestions for people on those sorts of extremes?
Sure. So with the physical extreme, if you are uncomfortable, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to be able to meditate, because that's just going to be it's going to take over your experience, and it's going to distract you, and it's going to be impossible to really work at a deeper level. So it's important to find a position that you're comfortable in. For younger people who are more flexible, maybe have a yoga practice going on, they can sit cross-legged on the floor and it's no big deal, right? And they can work in that position. For older people who may be less flexible or have an injury, that's not feasible. So for them, it's about finding a comfortable chair to sit in. It's possible to meditate lying down, but as you can imagine, there's the risk, you know, when you're trying to relax and you're lying down, you'll just fall asleep. And while that is not necessarily a bad thing, because a lot of us are chronically underslept, you know, it could be a problem if you want to start to work deeper levels of awareness of your consciousness. But any real position that's comfortable for your body, they have different types of props that are available. Some people like to kneel and sit on a stool as opposed to sitting cross-legged. Actually, as I'm talking to you right now, I have this little contraption here that's been really helpful for my posture. So it's like it's something that wraps around my lower back, and then these go around my knees, and it just helps to keep my back straight. You know, it's good when I'm sitting at a desk for a long period of time, but you can use this when you're meditating. You can sit against a wall to help you as well. What happens is that as you practice more and more, your body starts to get stronger, your back starts to get stronger, and you're able to actually sit in a straight position for a long period of time, and that's so that will grow in as well. So physically, you know, if you have some kind of injury or limitation, just simply modify it so that you're able to be comfortable enough. Now, having said that, the whole way meditation works is that it's meant to draw discomfort to the surface, right? So you may be comfortable in the beginning, but after 10 minutes, the mind starts to get agitated, restless, and something gets pulled up from the surface, the bottom of the psyche to the surface, and now you've got to work with that. And so recognizing that things kind of come in waves. So you might have a period of like intense relaxation and emptiness, followed by a storm of agitation and discomfort in the body and so forth. But this is what we're here to learn, is that nature is very, it's transient, it flows, it fluxes, and while the body and the mind are going through these roller coasters of experiences, there's this part of our awareness that can witness it all, that is unchanging. So that's one of the insights of it. Now, from the emotional side of things, with meditation, like I was just saying, can sometimes draw up to the surface intense experiences, grief, sadness, fears, desires, all kinds of like these types of states of being that draw us out of our center and put us into some kind of biological, physiological response in the body. You know, heart rate goes up, cortisol in the blood, all that kind of stuff. We want to start to see that these types of fears and desires are within us. They're part of the psyche. And meditation is helping us to actually bring that up to the surface so we can work with them in a safe environment, right? Where there's no immediate threat. We know that we're in our home and there's no danger. So it's giving us now the opportunity to draw these experiences up to the surface and begin to mediate them, begin to work with them. And the more that we can actually experience these intense emotions, whatever they may be, without muting them, shutting them down like we normally would, the more that we're actually developing the nervous capacity to handle that charge without breaking down and trying to shut them off. Such that later in life, when something similar like this happens, we've had the practice, we've had the experience to be able to handle something intense, and we won't shut down. You know, we'll be able to maintain that equilibrium, that equanimity and equipoise of our mind, and be able to act in the most appropriate manner, whatever it might be. It also helps us to get over deep-seated trauma, you know, from our past, and fears, etc. I'll share with you one major thing that happened to me on my second 10-day retreat. So it's the second time I did a 10-day silent retreat. about halfway through the course, I just had this belief, this thought that my grandfather had passed away. It was early in the morning and I could feel like it was something, I was paralyzed in my chest. Everybody had gotten up and gone to the dining hall for breakfast and I couldn't move. And I just had this incredible emotional release. Like I've never cried like this in my entire life. It probably lasted for about 20 minutes. My eyes were puffy the rest of the day. But at some point, I started to slow down my breath. I started to say like, okay, if he had passed away, my family knows where I am. They'll call me, to breathe through it, to get through it. And after that experience, he didn't pass away. He was fine. We had him for many years afterwards. But after that experience, my fear of death had been extinguished. Like it had been released, and I was just relaxed, and I was so much calmer, and I really haven't felt fear since that time. And so to sort of understand that part of our practice, whatever it may be, in our yoga, in our meditation, in our prayer, whatever it may be, part of it is that we want to allow ourselves the freedom and the space to have some kind of intense emotional recognition of how precious everything is and how impermanent everything is, and how not to, in essence, not to take ourselves too seriously, because, we too will one day have to let go of our body. So rather than worry about that, and generate all these fears and tensions, accept it. And by accepting it, be fully present and be able to share that presence with everyone who's, who you encounter.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's interesting too, because a lot of the primary work too, I was talking about trauma earlier, but Dr. Peter Levine, who's one of the other main psychologists that works with trauma, they're finding mindfulness is an incredibly powerful tool to use for it. Because they said a lot of times problems like trauma happen when people are immobile and under fear. So that could be under medical intervention sometimes, or certain areas of abuse, or motor vehicle accident, or something along those lines. And the part of the healing comes back when we're able to get back into a position of non-mobility, but with safety, and then being able to touch back in on sensation. And so being in a meditative state where we are technically immobile, but it's a safe environment, allows us now to start the process of touching in on body sensations and then coming back out of it, touching in on it and coming back out of it, so that we get to almost retrain the body. And actually what we're doing in a lot of ways is retraining the nervous system that got stuck in many places. So
Yeah.
I think it's such a wonderful, powerful tool.
It really is, yeah.
Josh, you had mentioned before some of the stuff around the brain. What are some of the big awarenesses that have come up and as far as the changes that can actually happen in the brain with meditation and mindfulness that you're aware of?
Okay. Now, I should say I'm not a neuroscientist, but I have looked into this. I'm curious, of course, as to what's happening. And there's really one major shift that I've learned that happens with meditation, and it can happen in as soon as 8 weeks. So it doesn't really take all that long for this to actually physically change the structure of the brain. And what happens is that as we were evolving, we moved through different phases. We have a sort of a more primitive reptilian type of center in our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is responsible for the fight or flight responses in the body. So it was like, are we under attack, or do we have to fight, or do we have to run, as we were evolving as more primitive beings? And as we evolved and the brain got bigger, the prefrontal cortex started to grow. And it's responsible for higher order functioning, like decision making and empathy and these types of awareness, concentration, and so forth. And what meditation does is that it starts to make the Cordis, the prefrontal cortex, thicker, so you can more attention, more energy, more circulation, however you want to think of it, is going to that part of the brain, helping it to grow. And it is actually rerouting the the external stimuli that comes into the awareness, it reroutes it away from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex. So before, where something would happen and we would have a very reactionary response to it, now we are starting to apprehend it more fully through the prefrontal cortex. And then we can now make a decision. You know, should we respond with anger, or should we maybe just let it pass and like take a breath and diffuse it? Do I need to take action and say something, or is it better for me to maybe, again, just let it pass, so forth? So what it's done is it's now given us a little more control over how we act, and how, especially how we react to whatever happens to be arising. Before, it would be more influenced by this more primitive amygdala, fight or flight. Now we have like this buffer, if you will, of time where it comes in, and the prefrontal cortex, the awareness of the meditator, can observe it, analyze it, and decide what's the best course of action to keep the peace or keep the equilibrium. In some cases, it may be tough love. Sometimes you have to like take strong action. But even in those cases, you're doing it at a pace, in a way in which you are aware, right? It's not a reaction. It's not just you're personalizing it. You're doing it from a place of full understanding of what you're saying and why you're saying it. So pretty remarkable how meditation, something is just as simple as sitting with yourself, observing your own inner mechanisms of how you perceive things. Basically what we're doing as meditators is we're taking the camera, and instead of, and we're turning the camera back around on itself to observe it and say like, okay, how does this camera work? You know, what areas are, really what it is what's the quality of the lens? You know, is this lens really clean and clear? Am I seeing things the way they are? Or is there like, specks on the lens that are distorting my view? And the more that we meditate, the more we're actually cleaning the lens, we're clearing it. And what we're clearing it of is our past conditioning and the way that past events have shaped the way that we see things now, so that we can actually see things from a fresh perspective.
Nice. I remember a author, Joe Dispenza, he talked about it once, and he was talking about the prefrontal cortex being our higher level thinkings and our amygdala being more related to arousal and strong emotions. And he said that we can reroute more of that energy towards the prefrontal cortex, then we literally become more divine and less animalistic.
Yeah, absolutely. You can think of it, I think of it another way too, is that the animalistic is like the terrestrial. So it's like, it's sort of what's happening in the world of matter. Whereas the divine is sort of when you get into the consciousness, pure consciousness, that is like free of form. All the forms happen within it, but it is not the form itself. So an example of this would be like how when you're on an airplane and you're ascending, all the weather, whether it's, storms or sunshine, rainbows, clouds, whatever it may be, it happens under the level of the clouds. But as soon as you get above the clouds, no matter what's happening below, it's smooth sailing, clear skies, right? And in a sense, like as we're meditating, as we're developing the prefrontal cortex, we're getting to that smooth sailing space where, there's going to be a lot of rumbling and unpredictability going on below, but we have this perspective, this higher perspective, to be able to see it and, not get too entangled with it.
Mm-hmm. So now we just finished talking about the mind a lot and the benefits of those different areas of the mind. Can we talk a little bit about the importance of feeling? So particularly in, Western culture, because that's what I'm more familiar with. I'm sure it's probably in others as well. But a lot of times the concept of feeling is either wired out of us in a lot of ways. Either we are told not to feel, and there's lots of statements around that, whether stop being a baby, boys don't cry, grin and bear it, all of these types of things. So in some ways, we become disconnected to our feelings. From your perspective, what is the importance of feeling?
Okay, it's a great question. Our bodies have been evolving for so much longer than our thinking, rational minds. They're relatively brand new on the evolutionary timeline. And so there's a sensate wisdom in the body that knows what's really happening. You know, we've heard it coined like our gut instinct, those types of terminologies. And because we live in this really fast-paced society that has emphasized the cerebral aspects, right? Like it's reading, learning, it's screens, you know, it's all this kind of very quick stimulation. Many of us have, like you said, lost track and sensitivity to how we feel. And in fact, sometimes having any type of feeling that's more than just basic can be a source of discomfort for people, and they seek to try to mute it in some way by overeating or oversleeping or whatever it may be. And what we need as conscious beings is to become very much attuned to the body again, because the body is very much the barometer of what's happening in the world. Light is coming in as waves, sound is coming in as waves. We are sensing people's frequencies and so forth. And there's this intuition that is available to us if we can be aware of that, if we can feel it, if we can be open to how we feel in these sensations. And that can help us a lot because it'll save a lot of mistakes, and it can save a lot of regrets. I'm sure a lot of us have had a sense that something didn't feel right about it, but we talked ourselves into continuing, only to find out that we were right, you know, many months or many years later, and regretted it. So there's this intuitive quality that arises through our practice. Yoga and meditation really help to generate intuition. And intuition is a way of basically synthesizing all the available inputs that are around us. You know, what's happening, what are the signals that we're getting with the inherent wisdom of, you know, thousands of years of evolution of the body and the mind, to make a decision, or to decide on a course of action, or whatever the case may be. What I have found is that yoga practice, like having a yoga practice, is one of the best ways to develop sensitivity. So you start to become more in touch with your feelings. In fact, like I've seen countless students going into a back bend and starting to cry, you know, get really emotional. And of course, you know, you're opening up the heart center, and these are people that may have been holding in a lot of trauma for years. And when yoga is asking you to do this, it's you know, it's breaking that up and it's surfacing. And so, you know, full expression of your body will really help you to bring emotions to the surface and sensitivity back. What's nice too is that both meditation and yoga help you to become more sensitive to how relationships and food influence you and impact you, right? So you start to become more aware of what's toxic and what's helpful. And you make shifts. You know, it may not happen right away, but eventually, you know, you start to shift and say, I'm not going to eat that anymore, or I'm not going to entertain this energy in my life anymore, and I'm going to reorient. And so it starts slowly, but then it really gains momentum. And before you know it, you become very sensitive, which is both in a way a blessing and a curse. You know, because if you're feeling everything all the time, there's no getting away from it at times. All sensations and all experiences are opportunities for us to practice mindfulness and equanimity. So we come to eventually see that as, you know, our practice. But beforehand, you know, the ignorance is bliss, you know, has some value to it, because maybe you weren't feeling as much as you are now. But on the other hand, you were also more limited in you know, and what you're capable of expressing and producing as well.
Nice. Josh, out of all of your years being in the world of yoga and meditation and this practice, have you come across any specific lessons or teachings or insights, aha moments that have come up for you that really changed the course of direction in your life of some sort?
Well, I mean, like we talked about right at the beginning, when I took that book out of the library, that was a huge catalyst to changing the course of my life. I decided, instead of going back to law right away, to travel to India, where I then encountered meditation, and that again changed the course of my life. So there's been a lot of events that have occurred that led me to where I am now. As far as specific teachings, there's so many, but I'll try to highlight a couple that come to mind. One is one of my favorite teachers. He wrote a book called I Am That, Sri Miska. So he would hold these open discussion, question answer sessions where people would come and speak with him. And one of the seekers came and asked him a lot of questions about yoga. It was going on and on. And then Niskadarta asked him, why are you practicing yoga? Are you practicing yoga to gain or to give up? And he goes on to discuss a little more, but that question in and of itself is so so revelatory to me on many levels, because we can easily delude ourselves into thinking that we're doing all of these things to become more spiritual, to become more compassionate, and this and that. But so long as we feel like we are trying to accumulate skills, accumulate advancement in awareness and practice, whatever it may be, then we are basically working in the exact opposite direction of what spiritual traditions are teaching us and leading us towards, which is to say that our practice should be teaching us to let go, to let go of identification with anything, and to start to instead experience ourselves as connected to everything, as being everything. So yoga and meditation create more space in us. They help us become space holders for others. And the more that we let go, relax, the more that we're going to be able to have that internal space to be able to accommodate and mediate and balance and ultimately help others who may be still in the egocentric frame of mind. So that was a really profound quote for me. Is, are you practicing to gain or to give up? And when you realize that your practice is really about letting go and giving up attachments to things, giving up identifications with things, so that your natural compassion, empathy, love can shine forward, then I think you're going to be quickly on the right path. Another one I wanted to add here was the realization how in yoga we have the 8 limbs, right? And in many different traditions, there's it's not just meditation. There's like the ethical, the moral components to the religion, to the technique, the tradition, etc. And to recognize that how all the limbs work organically together. So that if you are doing, let's say, yoga asana and stretching, you are also practicing meditation. You are also developing greater sensitivity. It's also going to help you to become more ethical, and it's also going to help you to become more clean for the body, to help purify the body and all of this. And conversely, as you become more ethical, or as you focus on being more pure in what you eat and so forth, that it's going to help you grow your meditative capacity. And so everything works together. You can't really separate one thing from the next. Everything is intertwined. And then finally, there can be times where it feels like we are stuck in our practice, where we've plateaued, and we're practicing. It doesn't feel like we're really progressing in any way. But what I've experienced is that the way nature works is often in the form of quantum leaps. So it could be that you are plateaued and feel stuck for a while, but then all of a sudden, when the time is right, when the season is ripe, you've advanced. Something has happened, and you realize, oh, like I've changed. Something has evolved, and And then in retrospect, you look and realize, it was all of that work while I was plateaued. It was just manifesting in the body. It was being nurtured. And eventually it took a while, but when the time was right, it now is here. And so to realize that even if it feels like you're getting stuck on something, to keep at it, because when the time is right in this natural cycle, you'll have that advancement, that leap, and realize like, oh, I got from here to here seemingly without transversing the space in between. That's the quantum leap aspect of it. But it was all of this like potential kinetic energy that you're building here that actually got you to propel and land over here. So
Yeah, don't get too caught up on timelines with stuff like that.
Exactly. It's not a linear practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points, Josh. Josh, for people that would like to learn more about you, and you run workshops and whatnot too on meditation, where can they learn about the work you're doing and what's coming up next?
Yeah, well, the best way is to email me. Send an email at yogawithjosh@yahoo.ca. I teach a regular Sunday night restorative and mindfulness meditation class at Downward Dog. That's at 735 Queen Street West in Toronto. I'm involved with 889's yoga teacher training programs, and I'll be offering workshops in the spring at both Downward Dog and 889. And that's it for now. I'm still focused on my law, and that's taking up a lot of my day-to-day stuff. But the idea is to eventually start to lead retreats down in the south of Mexico, where people will come and become integrated with yoga, meditation, healthy living, good lifestyles, nutrition, all of that kind of stuff. So that's hopefully in later this year or next year.
Oh, I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Josh, thank you so much for your time and your energy and your wisdom. Very much appreciated.
My pleasure, Jason. It's been great talking with you. I hope we'll do it again soon.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.